something about the courtroom felt different this time. The air was heavy, the cameras clicked faster, and Sean "Diddy" Combs, once one of the most untouchable men in music, stood silently as the judge leaned forward. His lawyers had come armed with an offer so outrageous, so unprecedented, that they believed it would finally set him free. $50 million. Cash, assets, ironclad restrictions, 24/7 monitoring. It didn't matter. Judge Aaron Subramanian looked him dead in the eye and said no. No to the money. No to the plea for mercy. No to the idea that fame and fortune could tip the scales of justice. For the 5th time since his arrest, Sean Combs would return to his cell, this time knowing there was no lifeline left before sentencing. The court's reasoning was brutal. They called him a flight risk, a danger to the community, a man capable of influencing witnesses from behind locked doors. They cited violent history, surveillance footage, and an alleged pattern of intimidation that made the $50 million offer meaningless. And yet, the story doesn't end there. Behind the scenes, old friends are staying silent, enemies are circling, and even one of his former accusers has come forward to defend him. Some say he's being made an example of. Others believe this is just the beginning of a reckoning that will rip through the music industry. So, how did the man who once defined hip-hop luxury end up here? And why was $50 million not enough to open the door to freedom? Tonight, we break down the courtroom clash, the history that brought him here, and the fallout that could change everything. On the morning of August 4th, 2025, the courtroom was a battlefield before a single word was spoken. The air was thick, almost claustrophobic, and every click of a camera felt like it might shatter the silence. Sean "Diddy" Combs sat flanked by his attorneys. Sharp suits, leather briefcases, and eyes locked on the bench. This wasn't just another bail request. This was his final chance before sentencing to walk out of custody. His lawyers came in armed with what they called an extraordinary proposal, a $50 million bond secured by cash, multiple properties, and other assets. They promised strict home confinement at his Miami estate, GPS ankle monitoring, court-approved visitation only, and random drug testing. Every safeguard they could think of was on the table. They painted a picture of a compliant man, humbled by months in detention, who only wanted to await sentencing in the comfort of his home with family. But the prosecution was ready, and they weren't pulling any punches. They reminded the court that this was the 5th time Diddy had asked for bail. They argued that his risk factors hadn't shrunk, they'd grown. They laid out his means to flee: private jets, offshore accounts, properties across the globe. They emphasized his violent history, including the now infamous 2016 hotel footage showing him kicking and dragging ex-girlfriend Cassie Ventura. They alleged he had a pattern of witness intimidation, saying even from house arrest, his influence could reach far and wide. Judge Aaron Subramanian listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. Then, in a calm but decisive voice, he delivered the ruling. The amount of money offered is irrelevant when weighed against the potential danger to the community and the risk of flight. The $50 million meant nothing. The law required detention for his type of conviction unless exceptional circumstances were proven. And they weren't. The words landed like a hammer blow. Diddy leaned back, staring ahead, while murmurs spread through the gallery. Some gasped. Others shook their heads knowingly. Federal law, in cases like his, is unforgiving, and this was a textbook example. When court adjourned, the contrast in the room was stark. Diddy's lawyers walked out with the tight-lipped frustration of a team that had played its last card. The prosecutors, on the other hand, carried themselves like they'd just scored a decisive victory. And at the center, Sean Combs was led away in handcuffs, not to a limousine, but back to the Metropolitan Detention Center, now with less than 2 months until sentencing and no more lifelines left. $50 million. For most people, that's an unfathomable sum. Enough to buy mansions, private islands, and luxury that lasts for generations. But in the eyes of the court, it wasn't enough to buy Sean "Diddy" Combs a single day of freedom. On paper, the offer looked airtight. The defense didn't just throw out a number, they built an entire fortress of conditions around it. House arrest in his heavily secured Miami mansion, GPS tracking so precise it could pinpoint his location to the room, a complete ban on unsupervised visitors, even the surrender of his passports and private jet access. To the defense, this wasn't just a proposal, it was a guarantee. But the prosecution saw it differently. And in truth, so did the judge. They argued that the amount of money didn't matter when the person offering it had the resources, connections, and motivation to disappear. A man worth hundreds of millions could lose $50 million and still have enough to live comfortably anywhere in the world. The financial pain wouldn't be great enough to stop him if he chose to run. Then came the darker reasoning: danger to the community. Federal prosecutors didn't mince words. They claimed Combs wasn't just a flight risk, but a man capable of controlling people even from behind closed doors. They cited years of alleged intimidation, manipulation, and coercion, saying his influence could easily stretch beyond the walls of a luxury home. In their view, house arrest wouldn't be a prison, it would be a command center. There was also the matter of precedent. Under federal law, certain convictions, like Combs's transportation for prostitution charges, trigger mandatory detention unless exceptional circumstances are proven. And exceptional means something extraordinary: terminal illness, urgent humanitarian need, or evidence the conviction itself might be overturned. Diddy's team argued that the conditions at the Metropolitan Detention Center were unsafe, referencing past altercations and alleged mistreatment. But the judge dismissed it, pointing out that jail staff had managed to protect him so far. In short, the court's logic was simple: if you've been convicted of violent and coercive crimes, you don't get to wait for sentencing in comfort just because you're rich. For Combs, the denial wasn't just a legal loss, it was a symbolic one. The same wealth and power that had shielded him for decades now counted against him. To the court, his fortune wasn't security, it was temptation. And for the first time in his career, the system slammed a door that money couldn't pry open. The story didn't begin in that Manhattan courtroom on August 4th. It started almost a year earlier, on September 16, 2024, when federal agents moved in on Sean "Diddy" Combs. That morning, multiple properties tied to the music mogul were raided, including his homes in Los Angeles and Miami. The charges? A sprawling list that, at first glance, read like a crime drama script: racketeering, sex trafficking, and violations of the Mann Act for transporting individuals across state lines for prostitution. From that moment, the clock began ticking. The first court hearings drew a circus of cameras and supporters. Diddy's legal team came out swinging, calling the accusations a coordinated smear campaign and vowing to clear his name. But the prosecution was building something bigger: a case that blended decades of whispers, lawsuits, and settlements into a single narrative of abuse and control. May 5, 2025, marked the start of his trial in the Southern District of New York. For weeks, witnesses took the stand, some protected by anonymity, detailing experiences they claimed left them scarred for life. The defense tore into their credibility, framing them as opportunists or bitter ex-associates. But the most damaging moment came when prosecutors unveiled 2016 hotel surveillance footage showing Combs kicking and dragging his then-girlfriend Cassie Ventura. The defense called it consensual roleplay. The jury didn't buy it. On July 2, 2025, the verdict hit. Diddy was acquitted on the most explosive charges: racketeering and sex trafficking, but found guilty on 2 counts of transportation for prostitution. Convictions that, while not carrying the same life-altering sentences as the charges he dodged, were still serious enough to guarantee prison time. With sentencing scheduled for October 3rd, Diddy's lawyers launched a relentless campaign to secure his release until that day. They filed motion after motion, each rejected by the court. Judges cited his wealth, connections, and history of alleged violence as reasons for denial. And still, his team pressed on, culminating in the massive $50 million bail offer in early August. That's how we arrived at the moment where everything collapsed. Months of legal maneuvering, public spin, and backroom strategizing ended with the same answer: no. For Diddy, it was more than a courtroom loss. It was confirmation that the system he had navigated, and at times bent in his favor, now viewed him as a man too dangerous, too unpredictable, and too well-resourced to be trusted with even a single day of freedom. For Sean "Diddy" Combs, the events of 2024 and 2025 didn't erupt in a vacuum. They were the culmination of decades of whispers, lawsuits, and public incidents that painted a far more complicated picture than the polished mogul in tailored suits. In the eyes of the court, this history wasn't irrelevant. It was a pattern. Go back to the late 90s. Diddy was already a towering figure in music, but controversy followed him closely. In 1999, he faced criminal charges stemming from a nightclub shooting in New York City. While he was acquitted, the trial exposed a lifestyle fueled by excess, celebrity privilege, and an entourage culture where trouble was never far away. In the years that followed, lawsuits began to pile up. Allegations ranged from unpaid wages and breach of contract to more disturbing claims involving harassment and physical violence. Many were quietly settled, often with non-disclosure agreements that kept the ugliest details out of the public record, but not out of the industry rumor mill. The 2010s brought new scrutiny. Former associates, security staff, and business partners came forward with accounts of a controlling, sometimes volatile personality. There were whispers of parties where boundaries blurred, of models and dancers who said they felt pressured into compromising situations. Each story was denied or dismissed, but the pattern grew harder to ignore. Then came the lawsuits in the years just before his arrest. Singer Cassie Ventura filed a high-profile civil suit in 2023, alleging years of physical and sexual abuse. The case was settled within 24 hours, a move many saw as a bid to avoid a public trial. Other women stepped forward with similar allegations, and while not all claims resulted in legal action, the headlines left a lasting stain on his reputation. The court in 2025 didn't retry those past cases, but prosecutors used them to frame a narrative. Sean Combs was not a man accused for the first time. He was a man with a documented history of violence, control, and intimidation. One who had the means to make people disappear from the spotlight and from the witness stand. For the public, the past made the present easier to believe. For the prosecution, it was evidence of risk. And for the judge, it was another reason why $50 million and a promise to behave were never going to be enough. In the hours after the judge slammed the gavel on Sean Diddy Combs' $50 million bail bid, the ripples spread far beyond the courtroom. This wasn't just a legal defeat, it was a shockwave that hit the entertainment industry at its core. For decades, Diddy wasn't just a chart-topping artist, he was a gatekeeper. If you were an up-and-coming rapper, producer, or even a fashion designer, being in his circle could change your career overnight. That influence made him untouchable for years. But now, the same power that once drew people in is driving them away. The first signs came from corporate partners. Within 48 hours of the bail denial, at least 2 major brands quietly removed him from their promotional campaigns. A luxury vodka company, once inseparable from his public image, announced it was reevaluating relationships in light of ongoing legal matters. His long-running fashion collaborations, once a staple of high-end streetwear, have gone silent on social media. Then came the celebrity distancing. Artists who had once praised him on stage began unfollowing him on Instagram. Some deleted old photos and joint appearances. Others, like longtime collaborator Kanye West, doubled down, wearing free puff shirts in public and calling the trial a witch hunt. That split, the defenders versus the deserters, has turned social media into a battleground. Industry events have also shifted. Diddy's absence from recent award shows wasn't just about avoiding bad press. Insiders say organizers are quietly telling booking agents they can't take the risk of him showing up. In a business where image is currency, being associated with him is starting to feel like holding a sinking stock. But behind the scenes, there's another conversation, one about fear. Several industry veterans have told journalists, off the record, that they worry about what happens if Diddy decides to talk. He knows where bodies are buried, figuratively speaking, and if the walls are closing in, he might not go down alone. For now, the celebrity world is split between silence, condemnation, and loyalty. But one thing is clear. The man who once moved effortlessly through every corner of entertainment is now radioactive. Whether they admit it publicly or not, many in Hollywood and hip-hop are already rewriting history, removing his name from their stories before it burns them, too. With his $50 million bail bid crushed and sentencing set for October 3rd, 2025, Sean Diddy Combs now faces the most uncertain chapter of his life. For the first time in decades, his future isn't in his own hands. It's in the hands of a federal judge. The convictions, 2 counts of transportation for prostitution under the Mann Act, don't carry the life sentences of the charges he beat, but they're still serious federal felonies. Prosecutors have made it clear they're seeking a substantial prison term, hinting at 4 to 5 years or more. In recent filings, they've even suggested that the court consider a higher sentence than the guidelines recommend, citing the severity of coercion and long-term psychological harm to the victims. His defense team is expected to argue for the lower end of the range, 21 to 27 months, emphasizing his acquittals on the most serious charges, his contributions to the music industry, and what they claim is a commitment to rehabilitation. But the bail denial was a major blow to that narrative. If the court didn't trust him with house arrest, it's unlikely they'll see him as deserving of leniency. There's also the question of appeals. Diddy's lawyers have already signaled they plan to challenge the convictions, arguing that key evidence, like the 2016 hotel footage, was prejudicial and misrepresented. But appeals can take years, and unless a higher court intervenes quickly, he'll be serving time while the process unfolds. Meanwhile, the outside world isn't standing still. Streaming services are circling, with Netflix and Peacock reportedly moving forward on competing documentaries about his rise, his fall, and the trial that bridged them. The media coverage leading up to sentencing will be relentless, and every headline will make it harder for the defense to frame him as anything but a dangerous figure. Behind bars, Combs will have to navigate a new reality. Federal prison strips away the trappings of wealth, and without the insulation of bodyguards and loyal staff, his day-to-day life will be defined by rules he can't bend. Some sources close to him fear this will push him into making desperate legal moves, naming names, cutting deals, or revealing long-guarded industry secrets to shorten his time inside. For now, the countdown to October 3rd has begun. When the gavel falls that day, it won't just decide how long Sean Combs is behind bars, it will decide whether his empire survives at all. The morning after Sean Diddy Combs was denied bail, the internet lit up like a match dropped in gasoline. Social media feeds were flooded, not just with news headlines, but with opinion, outrage, memes, and conspiracy threads that seemed to multiply by the hour. On Twitter by X, hashtags like #FreePuff and #Diddy deserves. It trended side by side, a split-screen view of a divided public. Supporters claimed the justice system was targeting yet another black mogul, arguing that prosecutors were more interested in tearing down a cultural icon than delivering fair punishment. Critics shot back that wealth and fame had shielded him for too long, and that this was accountability finally catching up. TikTok turned the bail denial into a content gold rush. Influencers posted breakdowns of the courtroom exchange. Legal experts stitched viral videos explaining why $50 million means nothing in a case like this. And younger viewers who had only known Diddy as a music legend were suddenly learning about decades-old controversies. On Instagram, celebrity silence became its own headline. People noticed who didn't post about the case. Longtime collaborators, former label signees, even family friends. Every unfollow, every deleted photo was dissected like evidence. And when Kanye West appeared in a Free Puff shirt outside a recording studio, it triggered another wave of arguments, with some praising the loyalty and others calling it dangerous. The cultural conversation reached beyond hip-hop. Talk shows, podcasts, and op-ed pages debated what this meant for power dynamics in entertainment. Was this the start of another Me Too wave in music, or a one-off high-profile conviction? For some, it was proof that even the most insulated celebrities could fall. For others, it was a reminder that fame and wealth still bought influence. Because in their view, if this were anyone else, the trial would have been even harsher. In the middle of it all, Diddy remained silent, locked away in the Metropolitan Detention Center. Every day he stayed there, the narrative shifted slightly, public sympathy waning for some, hardening into unwavering support for others. By the time sentencing day arrives, the court of public opinion may be as fierce as the federal one. One thing's certain, whether you believe this is justice served or a star taken down by the system, the Diddy case has forced a reckoning, not just for him, but for the culture that helped build him. Sean Diddy Combs built an empire on music, fashion, and influence, but now his empire hangs by a thread. The judge's denial wasn't just about $50 million, it was about power, control, and a lifetime of choices catching up all at once. With sentencing day looming, every headline, every social media post, every whispered industry conversation is shaping how history will remember him. On October 3rd, we'll learn his fate. Until then, one question remains. Is this the final chapter of Diddy's story, or the start of his most ruthless comeback?